Depends on time. We picked out 4 more.
We're about ready to resume our candidates forum. Stand by.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and get things started again. So Drew will have you answer this question first, and we'll pass the microphone down that way and then back the other. So, do you believe that hydropower or dams should be included as green power and energy? If so, how can present requirements be changed? And if not, why not?
Yes, absolutely. Hydropower should be considered as a green source of energy. It blows me away that it's not, and it just speaks to some of the special interests that push that initiative through, and we need to redefine that. California, of all states, I mean, let's be pragmatic here. California is much more liberal than Washington, and they say water is renewable and a green source. So come on, we have an abundant supply of it here. It's where we get our energy here. So yeah, I support a change to that, and we can do that through the legislature.
Thank you. Linda?
Yes, I do believe hydropower is a source of green energy, and I don't know how you would exactly define renewable, but certainly in my mind, it's an ongoing opportunity to have a really good, non-polluting type of resource. I think what has developed over the last few years in terms of protecting the salmon runs with the use of fish ladders and looking at how we can remove some of our really aging dams that cannot be restructured is the appropriate public policy. And I would support legislation that removed the current exclusion of hydropower.
Thank you.
And I would agree, but it is amazing how complicated the whole issue becomes when the legislature tries to work on it. And it does have to do with the tribes. And it does have to do with public power, PUDs, and the cost of the power, and the credits that they get or don't get in the process. We actually had a plan 2 years ago, and we thought it was all going to go through, and then Clark County and Pierce County got into a terrible battle over the issue, and the bill just disappeared. So absolutely, it is renewable. There's no question in my mind. But working between the tribes that have a lot to say about the water and how the water is used or not used, and the public utility districts as well as the private utility districts as well as the environmentalists as well as many, many people. Water is one of the biggest issues we will be dealing with over the next 100 years in this country. And there are many things that are not decided, and it's a lot of work, and I'm committed to the work, but I absolutely believe it's renewable energy.
Thank you.
So I would absolutely support hydro being declared renewable. It's kind of ridiculous that it hasn't been. I think what it is a statement towards is picking winners and losers. And what I mean by that is by taking our major source of power generation in Washington State and declaring it not renewable. What you did was we invested heavily in an untried, unproven, and very expensive power generation technology that we are currently paying these providers of windmills to not produce power in Washington State. The other thing, if we include hydro as renewable, what it does is reduce what you pay for power. And in these tough economic times, it's the job of our state representatives to do what we can do to make it easier on the citizens right now. And if by simply writing a piece of legislation that says hydroelectric power is clean, green, and renewable like it is, we will reduce our power prices, help out the citizens in tough times, and stop selling our hydropower to California. There's major power producers, not major and minor, in eastern Washington that sell most of their power to California so they can get credits in Washington State for their renewable power generation source. The other thing is, because we have a renewable source, we got a BMW carbon fiber plant that went in eastern Washington. They considered hydroelectric power renewable. And the power of the price of our power in Washington State as very inexpensive, and it encourages our businesses to come here. And well, I'll stop there. Thank you so much. Who's next?
Thank you. I will be Jeff.
Well, this is a tough issue. And you'd think it'd be very easy to say that, yes, it should be a renewable resource. And I believe that it is, actually. But the sticking point is actually, I'm going to counter Dan on this one. It won't reduce rates. And I'll tell you why. Because California and a lot of the other states, they have to have that caveat that they have they have to have a renewable energy out there. Currently, we rely on Bonneville Power as our second-tier energy source out there. And that's one of the things that made Washington great as far as our aluminum manufacturing, as far as our timber industry. We were able to get this cheap power up in this area. So if you were to open it up and say dams or hydropower is now a renewable resource, that's actually going to go up, because that power in which California and the other states are going to have to buy to live up to their quotas, we're going to be competing against them for the same resource. So is it a renewable resource? Yes, it is. I think that it is. But I'm also gravely concerned that it's going to do adverse effects to the power by which we buy in the state as well. But you have to look at what that caveat did in the state as far as declaring it not a renewable resource. It expanded our horizons to new ways in which we can produce energy. We do have wind power, and there is problems with that. The real problem, actually, is storage of power, and that's a whole different discussion. But it was interesting to note that by taking that out of the idiom of not having it being a renewable resource, we actually expanded our research and development to find new ways of power generation. I think that that's a good thing.
Thank you.
I also support hydroelectric projects. Water and hydroelectric dams are the cheapest source of energy that we have here in the Northwest. And a lot of people are wondering, well, why are we taking these dams out? Well, a lot of that is driven by environmentalism, a lot of it misguided. We need to look at all of our resources and make the determination what's going to be the most efficient. Currently, Microsoft, a large company in the state, and a large employer, moved all its servers over to a little town on the eastern side of the mountains called George. And they did this because the hydroelectric dams out there, and it had the cheapest energy and most reliable energy out there. The same side of the state, Washington Department of Corrections, who I work for, built Coyote Ridge. And they spent the whole year congratulating themselves about this modern model of energy efficiency. They put out 1,600 square feet of solar panels. Now, those solar panels have a 25-year lifespan. And over that 25-year lifespan, those solar panels will save the taxpayer $147,000. And that's a sizable chunk. Or so it would seem, because the cost of those solar panels was $880,000. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at these so-called new energy sources and saying, hey, I can save us $1 if we spend $6 or $7. And that's not efficient. You know, let's look at hydroelectric as the cheapest source of energy in the state.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and have you answer this question first, Lou. The Supreme Court ruling upholding Affordable Health Care Act left the decision to the states to decide on Medicare expansion. Would you vote to opt in or to opt out?
I would vote to opt out. A lot of the Affordable Health Care Act, what they call the Affordable Health Care Act, is paid for by working people that have health care, that actually pay into their health care premiums. I recently, over the last 5 years, have seen my premiums skyrocket. I've seen my copay skyrocket. And I've also seen a deductible added on where there wasn't a deductible before. The person that pays the most for this is the insured individual. As far as Medicaid is concerned, I think they really need to look at that and the fraud that's involved in that. There's like 35 to 40% of Medicaid is fraud and waste, and we really need to crack down on that so we're getting the most bang for our buck. A lot of these things, too, as far as Medicaid, Affordable Health Care Act, and even Social Security, just a few years down the road from now, are going to be trillions of dollars in unfunded programs, and we need to look at how to reduce that.
Thank you. Jeff?
I would vote to opt in. I'm going to tell a quick story. I had a neighbor who had a cousin, got in a terrible car accident, didn't have insurance, is in a hospital, still in a hospital 15 years later. We are all paying for that right now, all of us in this room, for that individual to be there because they didn't have insurance. So I understand the problems as far as in my mind, the problems in insurance companies, and Glenn's right here as far as our rates do go up. And there's a bigger problem going on here as far as the insurance companies are concerned, and that needs to be addressed. But the overall question is this, are we going to pay for insurance on ourselves, hoping that those that don't have the insurance right now will also have the benefit of paying for insurance on themselves, so in case they do get in a major accident, we're not responsible for that? That makes sense to me. You know, all of us walk around, in order for us to drive, we have to have this insurance card with us. If we don't, then we're illegal. And in many ways, it's the same way. In fact, it is the same way. If you want to drive and have the luxury of driving, then you have to have insurance. And I'm not going to say that if you want to have the luxury of living, you need to have life insurance or any sort of insurance, but the reality is this. It covers yourself. And we're not held to the burden of those that are irresponsible now. Let's make those that are not responsible to get insurance responsible to get insurance. That makes sense to me.
Thank you.
So going back to the question on Medicaid and opting in as a state with the Affordable Care Act, until that program gets fixed, I'm not inclined to jump in bed with the federal government. The waste, fraud, and abuse is rampant. And we had this question last week in our forum up in Bremerton, and it was coincidence because that very day, out doorbelling, talked to a guy that had owned a pharmacy and medical supply company, and he sat there for 20 minutes telling me the horror stories of the waste, fraud, and abuse that is rampant in the Medicaid system. And so until we get a handle on that, again, I'm not inclined to go in on that. You know, and healthcare costs are through the roof, and there's things that we need to address. And I'm sorry, the Affordable Care Act is not going to make it affordable. It's going to go up a lot higher. And we've already seen that with insurance rates. Next week, my company has to pay insurance premiums. And in the last 2 years, it has gone up, if my rough math here was right, roughly 25%. So I don't see the affordable end of this yet. Because the reality is there's a lot of added costs and a lot of added mandates, and we were talking about that with education. If we don't want mandates because we want to make it cheaper, well, why are we doing this then with healthcare and making more mandates? So let's revamp the system. There's a boatload of federal issues involved in this, but as a state, I'm going to stand behind our 10th Amendment and exercise our power.
Thank you.
This is, whatever it is, a 1,450-page bill. It's excessively complex, and I would not claim to have read it all, and the parts that I have read, I wouldn't necessarily know that I understand the full implications. But as a legislator, I would have to represent the 35th District, and we have a lot of poverty in the 35th District, and we have a lot of people who cannot pay for medical insurance. They don't get primary care, and they end up in our hospital. And for those of you who would roll your eyes, the reality is you're paying for that care every time you pay a hospital bill, every time you have to go to the hospital, because that's kind of how it works. So while I think that there are probably some major flaws in the bill as it stands, there are also some things I like, and I would try to be an intelligent consumer for the 35th District with regard to that decision.
Thank you.
I think the act is going to be a bit of a challenge when you get down to the dirty details in it. But I do believe that the people work very hard to take a very complex system and put in place a plan as to how we change our healthcare system so that every individual in this country has access to affordable healthcare. In this state, they actually use this state a little bit as a model. We have basic health. We have an individual payer plan, basic health. Now, it costs a lot of money from the state level, and we actually lost money because we found ways with our Medicare system to be more efficient with the dollars way back when, and then they set our rate at that lower rate, and they've never brought us up to the same kind of rates on Medicare reimbursement that they do, say, in Virginia. With this plan, we are going to get our fair Medicare reimbursement from the federal dollars. That's our tax dollars coming back to this state, and I think that's the right thing to do. The other thing is, you know, our little hospitals, the Mark Reed Hospital and Mason General, are called critical access hospitals. And state dollars were almost cut to make those hospitals not viable anymore, to make them go away. We have worked very hard, hand in hand with the federal government and state government, to make sure those hospitals are there for us. They say, well, we're only 25 miles from Olympia, we ought to go to Olympia. Well, we know what a valuable asset it is. We're going to have opening of a new wing there, and it is healthcare dollars that we all pay to make a hospital close by when you get in a car wreck and you need help quick. So I support the act, and how we implement it at the state is going to be very important, and we'll be working hard on that one.
Thank you.
So with anything, the federal government, when they come in and say, we're here to help, you should duck and cover. One of the things opting in does, the federal government doesn't pay all of the opt-in cost. There's still a huge liability on the state of Washington in really tough economic times. And my job as a state representative is to make sure taxes and regulations are as low as they possibly can be on the citizens. I agree with the entire panel. The Affordable Health Care Act took a system that was a healthcare system that was complex and made it exceptionally more complex. There's two models that we're looking at. Eastern Washington, there's some doctors that put together what's called Simple Care, where they have simple pricing written on the wall. What a lot of people don't understand is some of the reason why health costs are so expensive is because insurance companies are involved. Because you have got to hire people to do the billing, to get denied, to do the billing again, to get denied. It is a ridiculous system. It's a system that can be fixed. In Washington State, we have 54 mandates imposed on health insurance. And what that did was price all of the private competition out of the state of Washington. We have 3 providers, basically, nonprofit providers now. We don't have, and they just repackage all the health insurance packages. What we have to do is do the things we have to do to reduce the cost of health insurance in the state of Washington, be advocates for plans like Simple Care, get behind the doctors that want to be the solution to the problem and not the problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Am I next? Or?
Why not? The next question is, what is your position on charter schools and why?
I'm a major fan of charter schools. The reason I'm a fan of charter schools is because I think government regulations get in the way of us educating our kids. They simply do. When you talk to all the schools around here, I have met with superintendents, I've talked to teachers, and they talk about the government being in the way of them being able to do the things that they need to do. And a charter school experiment, and I say experiment, with a few charter schools out there can prove that if you get out of the way and empower the local communities to make decisions, then we're going to do a better job educating our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I've really looked at this issue for a long time. I actually voted to put it to a vote of the people last time around. The people voted it down. And since then, I've had a lot more time to look at how charter schools have had impacts in other states. And I do not support charter schools. If they're in place, the bad ones have been weeded out, but there were a lot of bad ones. So the business industry that really wants to offer charter schools say, well, we won't make those mistakes again. I'm not so sure. And if you like local control, if you really believe in local control for our schools, then how can you hand our schools off to charter schools that are going to have a board that's appointed and is accountable to another state board of people appointed by the governor's office, and oh, by the way, maybe it'll get back to your own school. The other issue, if you really look at states that have had charter schools for a long time, I hate to use this word, but they suck the life out of public schools. They take the very best, they do it by hook or snook, but they get the people that care about their kids applying and going to those schools, and the kids left in those public schools don't have the leadership, don't have the parent involvement, and I don't support charter schools. I guess I said that. I do believe that our schools are successful when our communities are successful. Our communities are successful when people have jobs, when they have a good education, when they have access to health care. and they have a safe and affordable place to live. Those are the things that I'll work for, and I believe our public schools will flourish when our communities are flourishing. I know they can do that because they are so closely tied to our communities. And once again, I do not support charter schools. Thank you.
You were clear about that. Well, I do not support charter schools. I do understand why a family might make a decision to send their child to a private school, but I think that's very different. The great gift of this country is public education. The thing that made us different, the thing that the rest of the world copied, was the fact that we had public education, that everyone could go to school and have a fine education, could build a better life, could start businesses and invent things and become our great middle class. And consequently, I think that where our community, if we really want good jobs, if we really want to build infrastructure, what the first thing we need to do is really support a good public school system. And that's a good conversation. It's a good conversation to have locally. It's a good conversation to have with the elected school boards in your community. It's a good conversation to have about how everyone should be contributing to that general knowledge. I hear people say, I don't have any kids anymore. I don't care about the schools here. Well, you know what? Someday you're going to want a cop that can find your house, and someday you're going to want a nurse that can read the instructions in the hospital. So you better want public education, and you better want excellence in education. And there's going to be a lot of good employers in this country that are going to make their decision about whether to locate here or whether to stay here, even if they start here, based on the workforce we have. And what we need is not only an exceptional workforce in our exceptional education in our K-12 system, but we need to support training programs, we need to support the junior college system, and we need to support more four-year programs in this community.
Thank you.
Charter schools, yes, I support the concept because I think when you introduce competition, you raise the bar for everybody. But it does need to be done in a manner that doesn't jeopardize the local system. But let's backtrack, though, for a moment. Right now, the majority of our college freshmen in this state take remedial math and English in order to get up to speed to do college coursework, and that's wrong. So we need to look at changes. We need to put all options on the table. So to just dismiss it out of hand, I don't think is right. And I will say this, the current initiative that is out there, I don't think it's the right one. I support the concept, but I think the initiative, the way it's written, it's one of the reasons that it's failed in this state multiple times is because it's been written poorly, and it does have the ability to jeopardize the local school districts, and I think that's wrong. So the concept I support, but it needs to be done properly, and I'm not so sure that the current initiative does that.
Thank you.
I as well am not in favor of the current initiative. There's a couple different types of charter schools that are out there, and I think we've seen some of the articles of it on TV regarding this. And I've got to tell you, I find it somewhat fascinating, the concept as it moves forward, specifically in our states. If you're to take a private business coming into the area and under the guise of a charter school and say that we would like to locate here to give a better competition to the public schools or give a better competition or another alternative, but we can't do that without public funding in order to make that happen, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's called a private school. So if you have a private school that needs public funding in order to stay in place, is that what we really want? Is that what we really need? I mean, it's an interesting concept because it seems like the people that are in favor of private schools in the first place, of charter schools in the first place, are the same people that say they don't want government subsidies. They don't want to be taxed more. So it's fascinating to me that the same people would say that they're in favor of charter schools. To say we want a charter school is to say that our current school system is broken. Now, I'm not going to say that it doesn't need some help. It doesn't need some ways where we can have some guidance. It definitely needs that. We always need to be improving. We always need to be looking and challenging ourselves to have a better system we currently have. The question is do we want to take public tax dollar money and fund a private school or a private education so we can have an alternative? I would rather see that money come into our public schools. Let's get a better education. Let's make sure that we're going in the right direction with that. That's why I vote no for the charter school initiative.
Thank you.
Actually, I support charter schools. I really do. Everybody's talking about supporting the public school system, and that is critical. We need to have a public school system. But why not have alternatives? Someone here earlier just said that the greatest gift that we have in this country is public education. Me, I was always raised that the greatest gift that we had in this country was freedom, the freedom to choose. These are our children. I hear a lot of complaints from parents about the public school system not doing the job that it's intended to do. And we're spending more and more money on this system, and it's failing the child. I really tend to go out on a limb, and stick my neck out there because I talk about what I believe in. For our kids, we homeschooled them up to this point. And in this fall, they'll be going to Mason County Christian because we made the choice. The only person that really knows what's best for that child is the parent of that child. We have a school system that is focused more and more on academics, which is really good, but we're not getting the results out of that. The state's telling us that, well, we're at a graduation rate of 72%. And I talked to a teacher one time and said, well, let's push that up to 90. And this person told me, well, half these kids are always going to be below average, 10% are going to have mental issues, the other 10% are going to need to be medicated. So that's over 70% of our children they're writing off right off the bat. I don't believe that. I think the focus should be the child. If you fund the child through a voucher system, let the parents decide what is best for the child. Give them the freedom to choose the future for their child. We're also not doing the vocational training that we had talked about, or Dan had talked about earlier. Everybody's talking about all the infrastructure work that needs to be done out there. We need electricians, we need welders, we need engineers, we need guys that are diesel mechanics. We also need people that can repair computers. But right now they're focused on trying to push as many into college. When 37% of those that get to college have to take remedial reading and math, we're not doing the job of even preparing them for that.
Thank you. Linda, we'll have you answer this next question first. The question is, transportation is crucial on the peninsula. What are your thoughts on privatizing the ferry system?
I am not in favor of privatizing the ferry system. Now, perhaps I'm a little bit biased in that my parents they were kind of early day hippies. And one of the things they talked a lot about is how much they really hated the old blackball ferry system across the Sound. We had a lot of family in the Bremerton area, and my parents took the ferry out quite a bit. And my mother particularly thought that having a public ferry system was the best thing that ever happened in Washington State. I believe that the ferry system is part of our highway system. I believe that we need to have adequate and frequent ferries. I would like to work with the peninsula to develop more jobs so that we have as many people taking the ferry over here to work in the morning as we do taking it to Seattle. We also need a really good ferry system because of our wanting to build a good core of jobs, and we need to be able to get goods and services both in and out of the peninsula. I've worked as one of the members of the Peninsula Regional Transportation Authority, which is Clallam County, Jefferson County, part of Kitsap County, Mason, and 2 tribes, so that we can prioritize our work and talk to our legislators, which we've done now for the last 7 years as a caucus. And always, always the ferries are part of what that critical need is, that and the Belfair bypass, of course, to get our area going and have the kind of freight mobility infrastructure that we need to develop the jobs that we want.
Thank you.
So the ferry system has been defined as part of the highway system within the DOT, and I support that. At the same time, I don't want to put up barriers to a private enterprise having a ferry system in there. But I'm not going to say go and scrap the existing system. And again, this goes back to our earlier question regarding transportation and reprioritizing the DOT and make freight mobility and congestion relief priorities. And by doing that, we can properly fund the things that will accomplish those goals. So if a private enterprise wants to establish a market in it, I'm not opposed to that, but I'm not advocating that we get rid of the ferry system as it presently exists.
No, I'm not in favor of privatizing the ferry system for a couple of reasons. The reason why there would be an illusion, actually, that it would be a good thing is perhaps rates would be lower or there would be increased service. And I got to tell you, that just simply wouldn't exist because it would be based on a business model. The ferry system is subsidized, and people say, well, wait a minute, that's wrong. But you need to stop and think. Our roads are subsidized, and yet we don't pay for them. I mean, we do, not directly, but when we get on a ferry, you actually pay a fare to move from one location to the other. Nobody can put the ferry system out there cheaper than what the state does. And there's 2 different studies that have proven that. I was actually sat on one of those. But the fact of the matter is if the notion is coming that it's going to be cheaper in the long run to have a ferry system put in place, it's not. It's not going to happen. Because like I said, after time, the rates will go up, or if people stop riding the ferry, then there's going to be one service is going to be cut, and then another service is going to be cut, and then the rates will continue to go up. Like I said, a couple studies have been out there to show that, and I think that the best system that we can have currently in place for the Washington Department of Transportation ferry system is to make sure that we keep it a priority, make sure that we do it right. So many citizens in this district rely upon that, specifically up in Kitsap County, but I got to tell you, I was surprised at the number of people in Mason County that rely on the ferry system also to do jobs outside of this area. You'd think a lot of them go south. That's what I thought. But a lot of them actually go north. So let's keep it within the state. Nobody can do it cheaper than that.
Thank you.
I also support the public ferry system staying on that. That is part of our infrastructure. And if you look at the economics of Puget Sound, everybody looks at Seattle as being the mega power. Everybody knows that's where Microsoft and Boeing are, and that's where all the dollars are. And so because of that, a lot of people that are looking for good family support wage jobs, that's where they're going. If you look at privatizing this thing, and I've worked in the marine industry before as a commercial diver, every time you add the title marine to any piece of machine or equipment or anything, it triples in cost just because of that title. If we go to a privatized system, more than likely the cost is going to double or triple to get you from point A to point B. And we need to keep that trade route open. It is the easiest way for people to get to work. It's the easiest way to move goods and services.
Thank you.
So as Jeff alluded to, there has been several studies, and the studies proved that it was exceptionally expensive, and the biggest problem is finding investors that would come in and take over the infrastructure in a private capacity. And there really wasn't any investor that thought that that would be a good bet because it's exceptionally expensive. I, generally would be in support of a private enterprise being able to come in, take over the system, but quite frankly, it wouldn't work in the ferry system. So what we have to do is find out why the ferry system costs us so much money and be diligent in cutting costs in the ferry system. One of the things we did right now is we bought a brand new ferry that in the paper, in the news, did you notice how expensive it was? Well, one of the mistakes we made is the Department of Transportation wrote the specs for that thing. We went to a different state. We took those plans home. We thought, this looks like a good ferry, and we wrote the specs. In the fire service, what we do is we go out to a builder and say, we want a ferry that does this, and write us specifications. So because we wrote the plans, we went over budget on the new class of ferries by a huge amount. So we have to talk about how we support our critical infrastructure and our ferry system and do it as economically as possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I would agree that there's been some problems with the ferry system. It's a very large system, and moving people back and forth and where people are going to end up, and there's been problems. And I think that every one of those problems, as they've been highlighted either by the media or one way or another, I think the state has tried very hard to deal with those problems. I did work with transportation for the first 4 years in the legislature, and I'll never forget going up to Poulsbo and sitting down with Argosy, I think it was, Argosy Lines, and we were talking about privatizing, and I was getting the whole history of how they couldn't keep the ferries running and they weren't very safe until the state took over. He says, well, it doesn't matter whether, I can run the boats from here to there, and I can make a profit on it. But the state's still got to make sure that the waterway is safe, and they've got to pay for the ports and the roads that go to it and the whole system that gets cars on and off the boats. I'm going, well, how is, and he said, no, there is no public transportation system in the world that can function efficiently and have people use it at a cost that they can afford. Every public transportation system in the world is subsidized by tax dollars. So if the state is going to pay for it, we've got to be more efficient, more effective. We also were right on track to replace a lot of big boats that were like 70 years old, and then I-695 came along and cut the funding, and we have been struggling ever since, although the federal dollars coming down to help build a ferry right now is going to help a lot. But they have a huge safety record that you won't find many places, and on time. And they've worked really hard, and I support our ferry system, and public ferries are what I will continue to work with. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go ahead and have you guys do your closing statements. Kathy, if you'd like to begin with that, now that you've taken a seat.
Okay. And then I'm going to get back to the fair.
2 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I have been a legislator for 14 years, and I know it could be a time for change, but it is also a very, very critical time as we have made so many cuts in so many ways to actually begin to build back the new funding system for our schools, some of the new funding that's going to need to be there for transportation, some of the funding we're going to need to sustain for the safety net for the health care of people. And I believe that I've worked very hard and will continue to work very hard to understand these issues. I believe our kids can be successful in schools, but they've got to have a safe place to live at home. We had a hearing yesterday on the percentage of kids that are living with parents that could no longer figure their way through the education system. They're on drugs, they have health care issues, they have gone completely bust because they have health care bills and are no longer able to work. And those issues alone make it very, very difficult for our kids to be successful in education. We can't forget about where the kids live and where their parents work. So I will focus on trying to provide jobs in this area, and also the jobs have got to be living wage jobs. They've got to get above $12 or $15 an hour if they're going to supply the kind of things that kids need to go to school. Healthcare is really important to me, and it's going to be difficult, but I will be working very hard on having an individual healthcare system that is as inexpensive as possible and subsidized absolutely by state dollars and federal dollars. The education system will get better if we really follow some of the lines, the Common Core standards that we have, and if we really do fund it better, I think our teachers will be able to address the needs of our kids better. And so those are the things I'll be working for very hard, and thank you, and hopefully you'll support me to do it again.
Thank you. Dan?
So thank you so much to the League and the sponsors of this event. Again, my name is Dan Griffey, and I would really appreciate your vote. I think it's time that we put rural jobs, values, and traditions back on the center stage, the top rung. It's time we elect representatives that represent those values and not the values of King County. It is time that we support the local jobs and embrace what we do here. We shouldn't allow ourselves to be relegated to a bedroom community status. We shouldn't do that. All political power is inherent in the people, and all governments derive their just political powers from the consent of the governed. And when I talk to the citizens out there, the ones that Kathy was talking about that might be that have substance abuse issues, they're talking about, I don't have a job anymore and I used to have a job. I worked in the timber industry and the government took it away from me. We need to stand up and say, no, no more. You can't have our jobs. You can't have our traditions. I used to get on a motorcycle and ride from Allen to Shelton as a kid. We can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore because we failed to realize that we need to reach out and afford immunity status to our rural property owners for recreation. We do that if they don't charge any money, but right now Simpsons and Green Diamond have lots of land that we used to ride. All these traditions that we used to do. In Thurston County, they were talking about having to have a permit to shoot on your property. A permit from the government to shoot on your property. Talk about our rural jobs, values, and traditions. It's a tradition that we go out and shoot. We need to take back our rights, our freedoms. We need to take back our say. My name's Dan Griffey. I would appreciate your vote and put somebody in there that truly represents rural jobs, values, and traditions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glenn, you'll be up next.
I'm glad that Kathy had actually touched on that drug issue. A lot of people ask me why I've stepped up to run for public office. I'm just a corrections officer. But everybody in the world looks at the prison system and says, hey, if you look at the prison system, you can see actually where the issues in society are, because that's the focal point. And right now, we have a lot of people coming into the prison system because of drug addiction. 90% of our crimes locally and in the state are directly tied to the drug trade. This election, for me, is about dealing with critical issues. We had a legislator went into session just earlier this year, and I thought to myself, even as a state employee, it's like, good, now we're going to get to the budget, we're going to get to fixing the economy, we're going to get to fixing schools, we're going to look at protecting our children and our communities and keeping them safe. But that's not what happened. They focused on a single social issue for the biggest part of the regular session and patted themselves on their back. They decided later on, well, hey, now we need to deal with the budget. Let's go into a special session, and then they finally come up with a budget on the last day of the special session. That's not how government's supposed to be run, especially during a time of crisis. We need to focus on what's critical, and right now, what's critical is getting people back to work in family support waging jobs and growing the economy. We need to get out of the way of the small business owner so that he can create those jobs, and we can get those revenues back, not through creating more taxes and more fees, but through promoting a strong economy and encouraging people to spend money. We also need to fix the education system. And that's a minefield when you're talking about the teachers union that a lot of people don't want to walk through. They don't want to say, look, the point needs to be the child, no matter what it takes, no matter whose toes we step on, we have got to fix education and make sure they're getting a quality education. And we need to ensure that we have safe communities. Everybody in this room right now watches the news, reads the paper, sees some kind of violent crime being committed on a daily basis, and all of this stuff is tied into the drug trade.
Thank you all for coming. At the very beginning, I kind of touched on the issues that I feel are very important to this district, and in fact the state, and it's about jobs and job creation. I've talked about that under the guise of there's certain things that we can be doing as a legislature to make sure that we have jobs specifically in this district. Transportation. I've been working on transportation issues for quite some time, specifically in the mechanics of freight mobility, but that also works well in the passengers as we try to move people through this district. I know my way around Olympia on this issue. I know where the money is at in Olympia on these issues. To go down there and say, listen, King County, this is going to bring jobs to this area, it's going to bring a vibrant community to this area, specifically in this issue, I'm confident that I can go out and do that. I'm a port commissioner at the Port of Olympia and I understand what economic development is. I just got done sitting down with the economic development director. We talked about how many jobs have been coming into Thurston County. It's one of the bright shining points in the state, actually. And I'm happy to be a part of that as a board member, and also happy to be a part of that as a port commissioner to say this is what we've been doing. These are things that we can be doing out there to do the type of mechanics to build an environment which we can do that. What do we have in this district? We have natural resources. We have a shellfish industry. The Green Diamond is gracious enough to provide this forum. We have to look at the tools and mechanics we have around us and try to utilize those to the best potential. And the best way we can do that, this is the third tenet, is really focus on a career and technical education. We've talked a lot about vocational skills up here. We've talked a lot about diesel mechanics. That's what we have to get back to in this district, and I recognize that 100%. The thing that I'm bringing to this, and I've said this before, if a decision comes before me in Olympia, I'm going to ask this. Pull out my moral compass and say, does this help or hurt the workers of this state? Does this help or hurt the workers of this district? Because that's the decisions that need to be made. When I leave here, I've got about an hour and a half to get to my job, or I'm going to put a hard hat on and I'm going to go to work. Because I understand what that is, just like a lot of you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you everybody for coming tonight, and for the Chamber, the League of Women Voters, Green Diamond, and Mason Web TV for putting this on. Appreciate it. My three main issues are reforming state government, make it more efficient, education, we've talked a lot about tonight. Let's fully fund it. Let's give our kids every opportunity and tool that they deserve so that they can be successful. And, of course, the job market. And all three of these tied together. It is a three-legged stool, and we need to fix them all. It's going to require leadership. There's been a failure to govern in this state for the last 10 years. The Speaker of the House has been a roadblock to this state being a leader in this nation. And is it any wonder that CNBC ranked our economic vitality for new job growth, for new businesses, as 35th? We have one of the highest failure rates for new businesses. We also are one of the states, though, that start the most businesses. So there is a little, you have to read into those statistics a little bit, but those are some hard facts. Every vote I take, I'm a business owner. I've got to live with the consequences of it. And that's a view that lacks right now in Olympia. We have career politicians that have been there far too long. I do sign the front of a paycheck, and I thank God every day for the gifts and the abilities that have put me in that position to be able to do that. And I'll do that before I even pay my own mortgage. And I don't think the folks in Olympia realize that. They didn't get the postcard last fall saying your workers' comp is going up yet again. We need to reform this system. I'm proud to have the support of local companies that get it, like the Realtors Association, Green Diamond, Alpha Test Corporation, Hood Canal Communications. Local businesses that are growing and struggling to create more jobs in our market. The Builders Association, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, whose sole purpose is to promote independently owned businesses. I'm glad to stand with those people and have their support. Again, my name is Drew McEwen. I'm asking for your vote, and thank you.
Thank you. Linda?
Well, I want to thank you all for being here this evening and for listening so thoughtfully and politely to all of us, because we do have some different points of view. I do think that this election is about jobs. I've said it's about jobs, jobs, and jobs. It's about keeping the jobs we have. It is about attracting new jobs that will pay a living wage and make a long-term commitment to this community, as well as keeping new businesses that start here. But it's also very much about the long-term solution we need. This area has struggled since certainly the 1970s, if not the mid-1960s, in terms of job growth. We need to really commit ourselves to training our workforce and excellence in our whole educational system so that the jobs of the future will want to be here and want to come and locate in the 35th District. I've been a county commissioner here for the last 7 years. I certainly stand on my record. During these very difficult economic times, Mason County now has an $8.1 million cash reserve. We've had to make some cuts, and those have been difficult. But that amount of money is our savings account. It's not like a checking account where you get new replenishment all the time because the revenues are still declining. I think that I know this community well. I'm, as I said, a retired police officer. I was injured in the line of duty. I had to make a decision on how to reinvent myself. My choice was to serve this district. This will be my only job, and the 35th District will be my only special interest.
Thank you. That concludes tonight's candidates forum. Again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters of Mason County for co-hosting this event with the Shelton-Mason County Chamber of Commerce. Also, a big thanks to Green Diamond for sponsoring the event and to Dietrich Allen at MasonWebTV.com for streaming and providing all of the technical wherewithal. Thank you again for taking an active part in your future and in your legislation. I appreciate it. Good night.
And that is a candidates forum featuring the candidates for 35th District State Representative. You have Dan Griffey and Kathy Haig running for position number 1. Linda Ring Erickson, Drew McEwen, Jeff Davis, and Glenn Gaither running for position number 2. And this will be online for you shortly in a couple of hours, so you can find watch it again if you must. Thanks for checking us out here on MasonWebTV.com.
Green Diamond Resource Company